In 334 BC, Alexander, king of Macedonia, initiated one of the most remarkable military campaigns in history against the era's superpower, the Persian Empire. At just 20 years old, his exceptional and courageous leadership secured him victory after victory over a stunning 10-year campaign that extended to the boundaries of the known world. He established one of the largest empires in history. Few individuals have influenced history so profoundly. To the Persians, he was Alexander the Accursed, but to the West, he was immortalized as Alexander the Great. Ancient Greece from around 500 BC, this rugged land saw significant advancements in art, philosophy, and warfare. Its two greatest city-states were Athens, a naval power where democracy, art, drama, and philosophy thrived, and Sparta, a stringent militaristic society renowned for its formidable army. In 480 BC, these city-states united to repel an invasion by the powerful Persian Empire. At the narrow pass of Thermopylae, a small Greek force, led by 300 Spartans, delayed the massive Persian army for 3 days before being encircled and killed. Subsequently, in the Straits of Salamis, the Greek fleet defeated the Persian navy, but could not stop the Persians from burning the sacred temples on the Athenian Acropolis. The following year, at Plataea, the Greeks won a decisive land battle against the Persians, forcing them to abandon their invasion. The next 50 years were the golden age of classical Greece, but rising tensions between Athens and Sparta, along with their allies, eventually led to a prolonged war, plunging the Greek world into decades of destructive conflict. Wars between Greek city-states persisted for nearly a century, leaving them exhausted and vulnerable to a new rising power from the north. For centuries, the sophisticated Greeks viewed the mountainous kingdom of Macedonia as a backwater, crude and barely Greek. However, under King Philip II, Macedonia emerged as a formidable military force. His most famous reform was the introduction of the sarissa, an 18-foot pike, double the length of a typical Greek spear, wielded by trained infantry fighting in close formations called phalanxes. In 338 BC, at the Battle of Chaeronea, Philip's army crushed the combined forces of Thebes and Athens. Philip had already gained control over most of his neighbors through alliances and conquests. Following this victory, he united all Greece in an alliance known as the Hellenic League, or League of Corinth, with Philip as hegemon, or supreme commander. Only Sparta stood aside. Philip began planning a grand campaign, a pan-Hellenic, or all-Greek war against the Persian Empire, now a weakening superpower with immense riches ripe for the taking. However, on the eve of launching his war, Philip was assassinated by his bodyguard, a victim of Macedonia's brutal court rivalries. He was succeeded by his 20-year-old son, Alexander, brilliant, restless, tutored by the great philosopher Aristotle, and already an experienced military commander. Alexander inherited his father's grand plan to invade Persia, but first had to secure his position as king. At home, he had potential rivals executed, then crushed rebellions in Illyria, Thessaly, and central Greece. He made an example of Thebes, destroying the ancient city and selling its people into slavery. In the spring of 334 BC, now ready to launch his war against the Persian Empire, Alexander led his army across the Hellespont into Asia Minor, initiating one of the greatest military campaigns in history. Alexander's army, about 40,000 strong, was drawn from all parts of Greece. The infantry were commanded by the veteran Macedonian general Parmenion. In the front ranks were 9,000 Macedonian phalangites, armed with the 18-foot sarissa. These professional soldiers were well-trained and drilled, forming a solid wall of iron spear tips that was virtually unstoppable. However, it was also difficult to maneuver and highly vulnerable to attacks on its flanks or rear. To protect the flanks, 3,000 elite infantry, the hypaspists, or shield-bearers, armed with shorter spears, were commanded by Parmenion's son, Nicanor. The second line of Alexander's army comprised 7,000 Greek allies and 5,000 mercenaries, armed as hoplites with large round shields and shorter 8-foot spears. A hoplite phalanx was not as effective as the Macedonian phalangites, but was still well-armed and heavily armored. The Agrianians were the army's elite skirmishers, expert javelin throwers from what is now southern Bulgaria. Other skirmishers from Thrace and Illyria were armed with javelins, slings, and bows. The shock troops of Alexander's army were the companion cavalry, 1,800 elite horsemen armed with spears and swords, commanded by Philotas, another son of Parmenion. Alexander led the royal squadron in battle. Additionally, there were 1,800 cavalry from Thessaly commanded by Callas, 600 from other parts of Greece led by Arigeus, and 900 mounted scouts from Thrace and Paeonia under Cassander. The Persian Empire was divided into provinces called satrapies, each ruled by a governor or satrap. Those in Asia Minor, now threatened by Alexander's invasion, met to discuss strategy. Memnon of Rhodes, a skilled Greek general in Persian service, advised them to avoid battle with Alexander, suggesting a scorched earth strategy to burn villages and crops and withdraw to the interior, promising that Alexander's army would quickly starve. It was sound advice, but the satraps were unwilling to lay waste to their provinces without a fight. They decided to face Alexander's army at the river Granicus. The Persian army formed up behind the river, which was shallow but 60 feet wide with steep banks. Their front line was a wall of cavalry, about 10,000 horsemen from across the empire, including Medes and Parthians from modern Iran, Bactrians from Afghanistan, and Paphlagonians from Turkey's Black Sea coast. Behind, in reserve, were the infantry, several thousand Greek mercenaries, a common sight in Persian armies at this time. These men fought for Persian gold and were armed with round shields and short spears. The Persians may have been unsure if they could trust these men in combat against fellow Greeks, so they were placed at the rear, determined to attack and destroy this Persian force before it could retreat. Alexander raced to the Granicus with his best troops. On his left wing, he posted Thessalians, Greeks, and Thracians. In the center were the massed spears of the phalanx, 6 divisions commanded by Perdiccas, Caenis, Amyntas, Philip, Meleager, and Craterus. On the right was Alexander himself, with his cavalry. Alexander, with 13,000 infantry and 5,000 cavalry in all, was probably slightly outnumbered. Ignoring advice to wait until dawn to cross the river, he ordered an immediate assault. He sent a squadron of companion cavalry to ford the river, followed by a regiment of Hypaspists and the Paeonian light cavalry. Alexander, calling on his men to show their courage, then led his right wing across the river. As they reached the middle of the river, the Greeks came under a hail of javelins, darts, and arrows from the Persian line. Those that made it to the far bank were immediately charged by the Persian cavalry. Alexander was in the thick of the fighting. He attacked where the whole mass of the Persian cavalry and leaders was stationed. Around him, a desperate conflict raged. Horses jammed against horses, and men against men. The Macedonians striving to drive the Persians away from the riverbank. The Persians determined to prevent them crossing and to push them back into the river. Alexander's attacks seemed reckless, but he was buying time for the rest of his army to cross the river, including the unstoppable Macedonian phalanx. Then, suddenly, Alexander was fighting for his life, charged by 2 Persian nobles. Rhoseus rode up to Alexander and struck him on the head with his sword, breaking off a piece of his helmet. But the helmet absorbed the blow, and Alexander struck him down with his lance. Then, from behind, Spithridates raised his sword against the king, but Black Clitus, son of Dropides, anticipated the blow, struck his arm, and cut it off, sword and all. Now, the Greek army had crossed the river, and the Persian cavalry faced a wall of Macedonian spears. Most turned and fled. The speed and shock of Alexander's attack meant Persia's Greek mercenaries hadn't even had time to join the battle. Alexander, in a blood rage or possibly seeing these Greeks as traitors, ignored their appeals for mercy. The mercenaries were surrounded and massacred. Alexander had won a great victory. Asia Minor now lay at his mercy, but the Persian Empire was still a land of immense wealth and power. Already, it was mobilizing its vast resources to face him. If Alexander was to conquer this empire and secure his place in history, he'd next have to face Darius, king of kings himself. As Alexander approached Sardis, the capital of the Persian province of Lydia, its commanders surrendered without a fight. But before Alexander could advance further, he needed to neutralize Persian naval power. Persia had a powerful fleet with major naval bases around the eastern Mediterranean that could potentially cut his lines of communication back to Greece. Rather than challenge the Persians at sea, Alexander decided to attack their nearest bases. The Greek coastal cities of Miletus and Halicarnassus both offered determined resistance but were taken by winter. The following year, as Alexander advanced through Lycia and Pisidia, taking cities, one of his most powerful weapons was now psychological. His spectacular victories and daring march into the heart of the Persian Empire convinced many, including Greek mercenaries and even satraps, that opposing Alexander was futile. Many cities opened their gates to him rather than face his wrath. The following year, Alexander marched east to Gordium, capital of the ancient Phrygian kings, where he was shown the legendary Gordian knot. a peasant's cart tied up with such intricate knots that it was said whoever could undo it would rule all Asia. Alexander, unable to untie the knot, simply took his sword and cut through it. In spring 333 BC, Alexander marched south into Cilicia. His advance was delayed when he fell seriously ill, probably from malaria, but after a few weeks, he recovered and continued his march to the coast and the great city of Tarsus, where he received news that the great king Darius was personally leading a vast army from Babylon to intercept him. The great king would have no choice but to face Alexander in battle because the Macedonians were in his empire's heartland. Threatening the great royal city of Susa, Alexander advanced along the coastal road to Issus. Meanwhile, Darius had gathered his immense forces at Sochi, modern-day Tel Succus, 90 miles east. Leaving behind his baggage train and many of his troops, he marched swiftly north, establishing a position on the north bank of the Panaris River. Darius now commanded a position astride Alexander's line of communication with Greece, forcing the young king to attack him. The great king wanted to crush Alexander decisively with a vast army that Greek estimates numbered between 200,000 and 600,000 men. But these figures are likely exaggerated. More reliable recent estimates suggest Darius's army was closer to 100,000 soldiers. The core of his army was the king's guard, the 10,000 immortals, named for their constant number, which was always maintained by immediate replacements. There were also many thousands of Persian infantry, known as cardaces, equipped with spears or bows. There were thousands of cavalry, including the famed Persian horse archers. From the furthest reaches of the empire came the Medes and Scythians from what is now Iran, Albanians from the Caucasus, mountain tribes from Afghanistan, Indians from the Indus Valley, and Scythian horsemen from the distant steppes. Many carried shields made of wicker and were lightly armored, a major disadvantage in combat against the heavily armed Greeks. The most numerous and heavily armored infantry were the Greek mercenary hoplites, perhaps 20,000, armed with round shields, short spears, and swords, hired by the great king for the anticipated clash with Alexander's phalanx. Alexander commanded an army of just over 40,000 men. His infantry were commanded as before by Parmenion, whose son Nicanor led the Hypaspists on the right flank of the phalanx. He was joined by Caenus, Perdiccas, Meleager, Ptolemy, and Amyntas, with their phalangites. As usual, Alexander led the right wing of cavalry, while Parmenion commanded the left wing. In total, he had 5,000 cavalry. Alexander made a camp on the north bank of the river Panaris. He was probably outnumbered by at least 2 to 1. Darius positioned his army behind a river, the Panaris. He reinforced his front line with heavy infantry, ordered his Greek mercenaries to the center, and placed cavalry on either flank. He expected his superior numbers to crush the Macedonians. However, terrain played into Alexander's hands, with the narrow battlefield limiting the Persians' numerical advantage. Darius's central position, commanding a high ground, seemed advantageous. As the armies closed, Alexander paused to address his troops, exhorting them to bravery and reminding them of their past victories. He led his companion cavalry in a rightward attack, exploiting a gap between the Persian left wing and center. Darius, misreading Alexander's intentions, sent a significant portion of his left flank to counter this move. This left the Persian center vulnerable. Alexander then ordered his phalanx to charge. The Macedonian phalanx, with its 18-foot sarissas, advanced inexorably. The Persians, struggling to match their discipline and reach, faltered. On the Persian right, the cavalry clashed fiercely with Parmenion's forces, but Parmenion held firm, preventing a flanking maneuver. As the Macedonian infantry engaged the Persian center, Alexander led a decisive charge against the Greek mercenaries. Despite their experience, the Greek mercenaries couldn't withstand the combined assault of the Macedonian phalanx and companion cavalry. The Persian center collapsed. Darius, witnessing the collapse of his center and fearing capture, abandoned his chariot and fled. The sight of their king retreating spread panic among the Persian troops. Alexander, eager to capture Darius, pursued him, but the great king escaped. The Macedonians pursued the fleeing Persians, inflicting heavy casualties. Alexander's victory at Issus was total. Persian losses were significant, with many killed or captured. Among the captives were Darius's mother, wife, and children, whom Alexander treated with respect. The Battle of Issus demonstrated Alexander's tactical genius and the effectiveness of his army. Despite being heavily outnumbered, his strategic maneuvering and the discipline of his troops secured a decisive victory. This battle marked a turning point in his campaign against the Persian Empire. solidifying his reputation as one of history's greatest military commanders. After the Battle of Issus, Alexander solidified his reputation as one of history's greatest military commanders. His decisive victory forced the Persian Empire into a defensive position and opened the way for further conquests. Following the battle, Alexander focused on consolidating his hold over the region and securing his lines of communication and supply. Siege of Tyre. Alexander marched south along the coast of Phoenicia, with his next target being the strategic island city of Tyre. Tyre was a significant naval base for the Persians and a formidable fortress. When the Tyrians refused to surrender, Alexander embarked on a 7-month siege. He ordered the construction of a causeway to reach the island, using debris and stones. Despite fierce resistance and the use of naval attacks by the Tyrians, Alexander's engineers completed the causeway. The Macedonian army then launched a coordinated assault, breaching the walls and capturing the city. The fall of Tyre demonstrated Alexander's determination and his ability to conduct complex siege operations. Conquest of Egypt. After Tyre, Alexander continued his southward march, entering Egypt in 332 BC. The Egyptians, weary of Persian rule, welcomed him as a liberator. At Memphis, Alexander was crowned as pharaoh, and he paid homage to the local gods. He founded the city of Alexandria, which would become a major center of Hellenistic culture and learning. During his time in Egypt, Alexander also visited the oracle of Ammonius at Siwa Oasis. The oracle allegedly confirmed his divine status, further boosting his prestige and morale. Battle of Gaugamela. In 331 BC, Alexander resumed his campaign against Darius III, who had assembled another vast army to defend his empire. The two forces met at Gaugamela, near modern-day Erbil in Iraq. Darius chose a wide, open battlefield to maximize the use of his superior numbers and chariots. However, Alexander's strategic brilliance once again proved decisive. He employed a feigned retreat to create a gap in the Persian lines, which he then exploited with a direct cavalry charge aimed at Darius. The Macedonian phalanx, with its disciplined ranks and long spears, maintained steady pressure on the Persian infantry. Darius fled the battlefield, leading to a rout of his forces. The victory at Gaugamela effectively marked the end of the Persian Empire, with Babylon, Susa, and Persepolis soon falling into Alexander's hands. Pursuit of Darius and the conquest of Persia. After Gaugamela, Alexander pursued Darius, who fled eastward. Darius was eventually betrayed and murdered by his own satrap, Bessus. Alexander, portraying himself as the rightful successor to Darius, punished Bessus and continued his march through the Persian heartland. He took control of the major cities, securing vast amounts of wealth and resources. The burning of Persepolis, the ceremonial capital of the empire, symbolized the end of Persian power. Campaigns in Central Asia. Alexander then turned his attention to the northeastern regions of the Persian Empire, including Bactria and Sogdiana, modern-day Afghanistan and Uzbekistan. These campaigns were marked by fierce resistance and guerrilla warfare. Alexander married Roxana, a Bactrian princess, to secure an alliance with the local nobility. Despite facing harsh conditions and constant resistance, Alexander's relentless pursuit and tactical flexibility allowed him to subdue these regions. Invasion of India. In 327 BC, Alexander crossed the Hindu Kush into the Indian subcontinent. He aimed to extend his empire to the ends of the earth as he perceived them. He encountered fierce resistance from the local rulers, notably King Porus of the Pauravas. At the Battle of the Hydaspes in 326 BC, Alexander faced a formidable opponent in Porus, who deployed war elephants against the Macedonian phalanx. Despite the challenging conditions and the formidable Indian forces, Alexander's strategic acumen led to a hard-fought victory. Impressed by Porus's bravery and leadership, Alexander reinstated him as a satrap, maintaining local governance under his suzerainty. Return to Babylon. After the arduous campaigns in India, Alexander's army, weary and homesick, refused to march further east. Alexander reluctantly turned back, leading his army through the harsh Gadrosian Desert, modern-day southern Pakistan and Iran, suffering significant losses due to the extreme conditions. Upon reaching the Persian heartland, Alexander focused on consolidating his vast empire, integrating diverse cultures, and planning further administrative and military reforms. Death and legacy. In 323 BC, while in Babylon, Alexander fell ill and died at the age of 32. His sudden death left a power vacuum and a vast empire without a clear successor. His generals, known as the Diadochi, eventually divided his empire into several Hellenistic kingdoms, including the Seleucid Empire, Ptolemaic Egypt, and Antigonid Macedonia. Alexander the Great's legacy is profound. His conquests spread Greek culture and ideas throughout the known world, a period known as the Hellenistic era. Cities he founded became centers of learning and culture. His military tactics and strategies are still studied in military academies worldwide. Despite the eventual fragmentation of his empire, Alexander's impact on world history remains unparalleled, shaping the course of civilization for centuries to come. Finally, we invite you to support our journey by subscribing to our channel at Socratic_Stoicism. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more inspiring content. See you in the next video.